so, oops, I read. All right, so again, we sort of ended yesterday, or whenever that was, last time we were here. Wednesday, okay. That isn't yesterday. That when it comes to payment, people who sold you the goods want you to pay as fast as possible. You who are buying the goods, you want to pay as late as possible. If potentially never, right? It'd be great to get stuff for free, but that never happens, right? So the idea, of course, is that businesses will give you incentives to pay early by giving you additional discounts, right? The terms of an invoice are additional discounts if you pay soon. That's pretty much all there is to it, okay? And it's incentive. And a lot of businesses actually count on that early payment discount to be the profit margin that keeps them open. Okay? I mean, it literally can be the difference between a business staying open and a business having to close, right? It's the fact that they can get a 1% discount if they pay, within the first 5 to 10 days, okay? Something along those lines. Now, we went over the 3 different types, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Flavors.
All right, so did I call them flavors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 3 different flavors.
3 types, right? What did I call the first one? Normal or standard?
Standard.
Okay, standard. Standard. This is where your discount is calculated as the days after the invoice date. Then there's the receipt of goods terms. And the only difference here is it's days after receive date. And then, of course, there's the end of month terms. And it's days after the end of month. And again, there's a certain number of days that's tied to how you write the terms, okay? So, when you see terms written like this, these are standard terms, okay? Again, it looks like I'm writing a bunch of weird fractions inside of my invoice, but this is what you need to know represents the terms, right? So this is 2% discount until 5th day after the invoice date. %1 discount until the 10th day after the invoice date. And then N/30, that just basically means net due in 30 days after the invoice date. And if you pay after that 30 days, then you go into what we call receivership, in which case then you start paying fees and penalties for late payments and all the other wonderful legal mumbo-jumbo that goes with paying late. Please note that I am not going to get into that side of the invoice process for you guys, okay? We're just going to deal with working with the discounts when you pay early, okay? So those are standard terms, right? This is the way terms will look when you use receipt of goods terms. Note the difference in the format, folks. If there's nothing at the end of your terms are standard. If you get this 3-letter acronym at the end of your terms, then your terms are receipt of goods terms instead of standard terms, okay? So that 3-letter acronym is basically how you tell the difference between standard and receipt of goods, okay? And note that the technique, though, is exactly the same, okay? So this is a 1% discount within 10 days of receiving the goods. And so note that in standard terms, the 10 days are based off of the invoice date, which is when the goods are shipped. ROG, the 10 days are based off the date that you received the goods, and so it's a slightly different format, okay? Note, though, that due in 30 days. And normally, folks, when you have standard terms, you will get bigger discounts, okay? Because the risk here is that you're paying potentially before the goods arrive. Because you're basing this off of the invoice date, which is created when you buy the goods, not when you get them, okay? So normally, these will look better than those. They don't have to, but normally they will, okay?
Is it always like 1% for 10 days, or can that vary?
This can vary. You can see 0.5 over 6.
Okay, so they can change that at their discretion.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Normally that's worked out in the contract, okay? And a lot of them will do 5 or 10 days. Again, though, you may say, well, can I get 0.75? And they'll say, well, then instead of 10 days, it has to be 7 or something like that. And that's how you kind of go back and forth. All right. And these sorts of things can actually change a little bit more common than your standard trade discount amounts. So that 18% trade discount you get at the beginning, that's usually fixed into the contract forever once you sign it. Whereas the terms of the contracts can be a little bit more fluctuant depending on things changing. Because you may discover after a certain while that their shipper is really crap, right? And so you never get your goods before the 5th day, and so you never get your 2% discount. And so you may decide, well, this is not to my advantage. I'm going to renegotiate and maybe, do something else, right? But that's the sort of thing you can renegotiate later. All right. And then last but not least, the EON terms. Note there is usually not a net terms when you're dealing with EOM. It's implied that the net due is due at the end of the month, right? And so here it's a 1% discount within 10 days of the end of the invoice month. And there's a star on that because there's a special rule that comes along with that. We'll talk about them. We'll do a couple of examples of those because those are just a little bit stranger, so bear with me to some degree. But EOM, folks, what this basically means is that your discount is not given to you at the end of the month. The EOM is just to tell you when the discount starts. This is still the number of days after the end of the month that you get your discount. Okay?
Oh, after, not before.
After.
Oh.
So in other words, if your invoice date is January 15th, what's the end of January? 31st, right? What's 10 days after the 31st, you will be getting a 1% discount. So the EOM is not when the discount starts or ends, it's when it starts. So if your invoice date is January, you basically have until February 10th to get 1% discount and the end of February to pay the bill. Okay? That's how EOM works. Alright? And again, this number can change if you want the date to be something other than 10, right? So this can sometimes be 1/6. And so the idea then is that your bills are always due on the 6th of every month, right? And large retailers tend to do this, right? So this is actually the way Walmart works, folks. This is how they set up almost all of their invoicing when they are the retail seller of a manufacturer's goods, right? They'll basically say, look, we want terms 1/whatever, pick a number. Usually it is 10. And what that means is that on the 10th day of every month, what Walmart does is it takes half of its workforce and sits it down in front of a bill-paying computer and has them pay bills to guarantee that they get the 1% discount from their manufacturer every 10th of the month. And since they have so many different manufacturers that they have contracts with, they are constantly paying bills, right? But they always pay them on the 10th. And that's why Walmart does this. Because then they pay bills once a month, right? Once a month, every month, on the 10th. Everybody knows, right? Everybody knows on the 10th when they go into Walmart, if they're a back office worker, that whatever they normally do on the 10th, that's not what they do. They just sit down and pay bills to guarantee that they get the 1% discount on that order, period. Okay? That's the way it works at all of the major, huge retail conglomeration type people. So Walmarts, Targets, those sorts of a deal, folks. That's what they do to guarantee that they are getting from their manufacturers an additional 1% discount on everything that they buy from them. Okay? And it may not be a full 1%, it may only be like a 0.5% or even a 0.75%, right? Something like that. But again, though, the volume that Walmart and Targets deal with, that 0.5%, it makes a huge difference, right? And so they guarantee that they'll do it. And these are the people that actually came up with this concept. And this is to guarantee that there's one day every month that they pay all their bills, period. Okay? It's a really cool plan, too. I actually respect Walmart for setting this up. They're the ones who came up with it back in the mid-90s, late 90s, when they first started getting big, right? They were like, look, we're tired of having bills be due randomly throughout the month, right? Where they constantly had to look at the invoice date and say, when's this one due? And then put it in a box to say, pay it before this date, right? And now they don't do that, right? They're just like, here it is. If you don't make all those payments on this date, we're going to be pissed off at you. And that's the way their back office works. Okay? Kind of cool, but again, we'll do some of those. All right? So those are the three types. So, now we'll just do a bunch of them, okay? So, let's order some stuff. All right? So, don't forget that there are still trade discounts, though, okay, folks? All this term stuff is just at the end. All right? Oops, I'm blue. Okay, so I order, let's keep the number relatively simple, $5,000 of goods. I'll keep it relatively simple. Let's suppose that I get a 15/4 trade discount. And my terms are, let's say, 3/5. Suppose I get really good terms. 3/5, 1/10, N/60. Now, realize that this information in a normal invoice is it's spread with lots of legal mumbo jumbo that comes with it. I'm going to break down the invoice to the very basic components that you guys have to deal with. Okay, so you're welcome. All right. And then I will also have to give you new things, right? I'll have to tell you that the invoice date. Now that we have dates in this problem, the invoice date. Let's suppose it was January 15th of this year. And I will always tell you when you receive the goods, too. So suppose it took 5 days to get delivered. Just make it simple, okay? Alright, so all I want you to do is, how much do I pay for these goods on January 23rd? So this is more along the lines of the type of questions you'll start seeing in the book, where they'll set up a problem, and sometimes they'll have a trade discount, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll have a chain trade discount, sometimes it'll maybe just be 1%, right? Whatever you have to have, right? These can vary for the most part. And all I'm doing is saying I'm paying the entire bill on the 23rd. How much do I pay? All right? So, process to attacking these problems. You can just go straight to the answer if you know what you're doing. I am okay if you jump straight to the answer. There are some people who don't want to sort of write a whole bunch of stuff out, and that's fine. I have no problem with that as long as you get the correct answer. I will always be more verbose. Okay, I'm going to show you everything just to be safe. All right? So, I am always going to start all of these problems with the list price, because that's the start of every invoice. Please remember that for us, as retail store owners, this is what we're going to sell. It's the MSRP of our product, right? So, what am I selling these $5,000 worth of goods for? $5,000. That's the whole point, right? And again, if you get something along the lines of I ordered 10 computers for $1,000 each, make sure you multiply the 10 times the 1,000 and tell me it's $10,000 invoice, okay? Alright, so there's my list price. Now, what normally comes after list price? Yeah, well, I'm not going to go that far, though. Let's just go straight to the net price. Because all I care about is payments. Trade discount amount is my profit, which I care about for my business, but all I'm caring about right now is making the payment. Okay? So, how do I figure out what my net price is for this invoice?
List price minus the trade discount amount.
I agree. How are we going to do it if we don't calculate the trade discount amount? What might you do with these two numbers up here? How will you compliment them? Will you tell them that they're nice and skinny today and that they're wearing nice clothes and you're happy to see them? 85 and 96, which basically is the same thing, right? You're so beautiful this morning, thank you, right? Now, what are we going to do with 85 and 96? Multiply them. Awesome. And note, folks, if you multiply those two numbers as a decimal together, you get the net price equivalent rate. I didn't ask for that. You don't need to calculate it, but if you want, you can. Note that you can get to the net price by just multiplying all those together in one fell swoop, right? So to get the net price, you can just do 5,000 times 0.85 times 0.96, okay? If you want to, you can just multiply the two discounts together to get the net price equivalent rate. That's what NPER stands for. The book likes to use that abbreviation. I'm sorry. The book is annoying sometimes. So what is 5,000 times 0.85 times 0.96?
4,080.
And so what we would say is normally this is how much we would have to pay to get those goods, right? But on January 23rd, what happens, folks?
You have to pay your bills.
We're going to pay our bill, but do I have to pay that full $4,080? No. How much of an additional discount do I get because of my terms?
Since it doesn't have the ROG or EOM, it means that that's standard, right?
Exactly. So first thing to note, since there aren't three letters at the end of your terms, this means these are standard terms. What are standard terms driven off of? The invoice date. So do I care about when I received them? No. Advice from the wise folks when you are doing these problems. You will always get both of these dates. You have to know which one to use. Just cross out the one you're not gonna, right? Since it doesn't say ROG, that's the only time you use the received date, is when it says ROG, okay? Only time. EOM and standard both use the invoice date, okay? So, on January 23rd, folks, what kind of a discount do I get? Why 1%, Seth?
Just more, so 5 days.
Okay, good. So, if we would have paid within 5 days of the invoice, we would have gotten a 3% discount. But the invoice date was on the 15th. Please note that January 20th, the 5th day, counts. Okay? So if we paid this invoice on January 20th, we would have gotten the 3% discount. Alright? So please note that the day here, it's until the end of that day. Basically, if you pay before midnight on the 5th day, you still get your discount. Alright? Obviously, we missed it, right? Because from the 15th to the 23rd, that's 8 days. Therefore, the 3% window or 3% discount window has closed. And again, there's a very standard term that you will hear, calling them discount windows. They open and close in certain amounts of time. This 3% window is open for 5 days. It's closed now, but because there's another term, we have a 1% discount until the 10th day. That window is still open. We're getting a 1% discount. How do I calculate a 1% discount on that $4,080? You're close. What's the complement of 1? 99. Again, you can do it old school if you want, folks. You can take 1% and subtract. But now that you've started to get a handle of these complements, try and use them whenever possible. Okay? So, what's 4,080 times 9.99?
$4,039.20.
So when I go to pay for this bill, instead of sending them $4,080, I will send them $4,039.20. And please note, folks, that the terms will never, ever be shown on the invoice. That's your job to calculate them. All right? It's a sort of a funny story. When I first started teaching this class, there was an older lady in the class who was sitting in the very back. It was very quiet for the first 6 weeks, 7 weeks of class. And we finally got to this section of the class, and I showed this particular example. She went, "Boop." It's the first sound I literally heard from her ever in the entire class. And I was like, "Oh, Dolores, why did you make a sound?" She's like, "Oh, that's what I've been doing." I was like, "What?" She had been the accounts payable for a local business that was selling like hardware, mail order hardware, for 15 years. And whenever she had to pay for goods that they were sending to her, they always said, "Take 2% off of whatever this number is." And she never knew why. She'd been doing it for 15 years and never knew why she took 2% off of the number before she went. And I was like, oh. So now you know, right, that this 2/10, that was just her job. They always said, pay immediately as soon as you get the bill, pay it immediately, and always take 2% off of whatever the net price is. That's what she did for 15 years. Didn't think about it, just did it, right? And then she learned why. And I was like, cool. And she's like, and I can use 0.98? I'm like, absolutely. Because she was literally taking 2%, figuring out what that number was, and then subtracting it, right? I think that's what they told her to do. So anyways, it's a cool story to sort of keep this class, sort of relevant for me anyways. I was like so excited when she was happy. I was like, yay! Because I don't know about you guys, but older people tend to scowl more than younger people do. So the entire first 7 weeks of class, she basically sat in the back and went. And she was very good at taking notes. Her homework was clean and spotless, perfect, right? But I never saw her crack a smile ever. So I was really happy when it finally happened. All right, anyway, sorry. That's how terms work, okay? So let's try another one then. Okay, again, don't forget that you may or may not get a trade discount in the process, okay? So let's do another one. This time we order $2,500 of stuff. Suppose that for this company we get a 16% trade discount. Note it's not chain this time, it's just a straight discount. We have terms of 1/5 N/30 ROG. Invoice date was sometime last year. Let's suppose it was 11/5/18, and we received the goods on 11/8/18. And I want to know how much do I pay on 1/11? Please note that in the homework they would undoubtedly have like $100 of shipping in there somewhere as well. The book really loves shipping. I tend not to, just so you know. All right. So, how would you guys start this problem?
List price.
List price. What's my list price? What am I going to go to next? Net price. How are you going to calculate net price?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
Don't forget that the number looks nice today. What did that work out to be?
2,100.
Note, if you multiply by 0.16, that would give you the trade discount amount. Okay, which you then have to subtract, but whatever. Okay? So, now that we're paying for this particular piece of goods, or whatever the heck it is, stuff, I guess, on 111, what kind of a discount do we get?
1%,
Why 1%?
because it's within 5 days of the receiving date.
Good. All right. So note, when you see ROG, my advice, cross out the invoice date, because now the only date that matters is when you receive the goods. In this case, the 5 days is within 5 days of receiving the goods. So yes, you get your 1%.
Okay, wait. Sorry, I didn't get that. We don't need the invoice date.
Yes,
Because it's ROG.
because it's ROG, right?
Okay, but what if we received it on
The 8th.
The 8th. 5 days after the 8th.
8 plus 5 is.
Oh no, it says 111.
Oh,
Yeah, there. That's why I was.
sorry, 11/11. There's meant to be 2 1s on there.
Oh.
Sorry.
I was thinking, yeah, I was like, that's a lot of days.
That
He
was
said it the 11th, then I just.
assumed I was using the 11/11. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, so
I did mean 11/11. So it is within 3 days of receiving the goods, which is of course within 5 days of our window closing. So we have our 1% discount. Get the 2 1s in there.
we get a 1%.
Be 2,000.
Okay. So multiply by 0.99 again.
2,079.
So we would send them a file transfer of $2,000 and $79 on top.
It's kind of that though.
Okay.
So if we did have a shipping charge, would we just take it off after everything else?
Yeah, after all the discounts. So make sure that if there was a $100 shipping charge that you need to pay with this, okay? If it's $100, if it just says there's an additional $100 of shipping, then after you've done all your discounts, add the 100 in.
Okay. And so, days ago on the notes, when you said the list price, you said you can keep it at 2,500 or you can minus it down to 2,400.
That's if the $100 is included inside that $2,500 such that you have to take it out, then yes.
Okay.
And that's where you have to read carefully, right? Because again, this is something the book, I will not do it to you, I will be very explicit, but the book will often say that this number has,
Oh, shipping included. So then I
Exactly.
would have to take it
then
out.
you would have to
But
take
if
it out.
it didn't say that, then I would just tack it on to the end.
After you've done all of your discounting, tack it on at the
Then
end.
add it. Okay.
Yep. Yes, and like I said, the book is a little on the shipping happy, so be careful, watch for them from home. Alright, so not bad with this one then? Okay, again, the only difference between standard and ROG is which tape do you use, okay? And you just have to remember which one to use, okay? Alright, and then the fun one is the EOM one, okay? And remember I put a little blue star in that? So normally you just go to the end of the invoice month, and that's the month that you add the days to the end of. There is one condition. If the date is the 26th or later, so i.e. 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, or 31st, you actually add an entire extra month to the terms if the date of the invoice is after the 25th, i.e. 26th or later. Okay? So that's what the blue star meant, right? It was sort of a, and this is a relatively recent occurrence, right? So what Walmart and Target were discovering is that they were ordering stuff from businesses in, throughout the world, right? And what was happening was that those businesses were basically forcing the shipment of their goods to always be towards the last week of the month. Because Walmart and Target often said their bill date was on the 10th of the month. And so if you're shipping something from the Philippines to the US, do you think it might take longer than 10 days for something to get here? Yeah. And Walmart and Target, do they normally pay for goods before they've received them? They actually don't. And so if they haven't received the goods and they don't pay for them and the 10th of the month goes by, what happens to their 1% discount? Goes away. And that was happening to them enough times that they basically came up with this rule that said, hey, if you ship after the 25th, anytime after that, towards the end of the month, we don't just get to the 10th of the next month, but tack a full another month on. So if they ship the goods on January 28th, and they were 1/10, so on the 10th of the month, instead of being due on February 10th, March 10th. A full month later. And again, because it happened enough to them, this is why they forced this sort of legal ramification on all of their different, manufacturers, and said, look, if you're always going to send it at the end of the month, that's fine with us, but you're going to tack an extra month onto your terms. And Walmart has lots of money, so they made it a legal thing, and it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They vouched for it, saying that this is legal and it's legitimate, therefore it's going to be the standard rule from now on. So this is the way it is. Good or bad, it's just the rule, okay? So bear with, okay? So, now when we do an EOM problem, you guys have to be careful, all right? So, here we go. This time I order, let's say I order $20,000 goods. Let's suppose I get a 12/6 discount and have terms of, let's do 1/7 EOM, just to be interesting, okay? let's suppose that the invoice date was, let's suppose it was October 28th of last year. And they received their goods on October 31st of last year. All right, so first off, which of these two dates am I going to use?
Your invoice date.
Yeah. Please note, folks, that when you receive the goods does not matter. Okay? The only time received goods matters when you see the ROG, right? When you turn pirate, then you worry about received dates. And hopefully, the date, folks. What do you notice about the date?
The last week.
It's the last, right? It's after the 25th, right? This means that technically you get a whole extra month, okay? Yeah, So when does 1% discount end? Normally you would say, oh, go to the end of the month and tack on 7 days, and you'd say November 7th, but because this is the 28th, December 7th, you go until to have that 1% discount, okay? Sorry.
So, sorry. If, okay, so say it was at the 28th though. Say
So like the 24th.
right. Then it would just, where did the 10 days come from?
7 days come from here.
Oh, so within 7 days of that date.
Of the end of that month's date.
Oh, and there's 31.
Yeah.
All right.
So the idea is that you always go to whatever the end of whatever month it is, and then tack that many days
7
on.
days on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Which will always be the 7th of whatever month it is. Because no matter what, whether you go to the 30th, the 31st, or the 28th, that's always the end of the month. So 7 days later is always going to be the 7th of the next week.
Okay. Well, because it's the 28th, we did that and we added an extra.
Yeah, so we added the 7th, but instead of being November, because it was after the 25th, we said, hey, that's a full plus 1 month, 12th.
Oh.
And don't forget that there's no such thing as a 13th month. Right, so remember that December turns into January, and that's the first of the... Okay, good. Just as long as we're all okay with that, then we're fine. Okay, so let's suppose that... you know why I say it, right? Yeah, of course, because someone has told me before that the bill is due on the 10th of the 13th month. And I was like, huh? They said 13/10. I was like, okay. You say so. Alright, how much do I pay on whatever? Let's suppose on 11/20. Again, any date before that December 7th gives us the 1%, so it's not that big a deal, but again, what am I going to do first?
List price.
How much is my list?
$20,000.
How are you going to get the net?
28 weeks and she's got 20,000.
8. Don't forget the 94 with it. So if it's changed, make sure you do both of them, right? $16,544. Note that's what I pay if I don't get an early payment discount. But on 11/20, I get my 1% discount. So what is my final payment amount going to be?
$1,378.56.
Sorry, what was that number again?
16378.156.
And that's how bill payment works, folks. All right? Now, you know there has to be a twist, right? One more twist. So let's suppose that you go to pay this bill on November 20th, and you go into the computer, and you're working on the accounts payable computer, so you sit down in front of that little, Weiss terminal, green terminal, and you go to type in $16,378.56, and it turns out that in the account that is tied to your accounts payable, there's really only $5,000 left in the account. So, for whatever reason, the person who takes care of money in your business did not put enough money into the account that pays for all of your bills, right? Happens way more than you think is possible. It's sad but true. All right? So, what happens? What if on 11/20 you can only pay $5,000?
Don't you lose the 1% discount?
Technically, no. The 1% discount lasts until December 7th, right? And it will always last until December 7th. Period. The question is, though, when you pay that $5,000 on November 20th, how much do you owe after it? How much do you owe after making a $5,000 payment on 11/20? So you're still getting your 1% discount, folks.
Can't you just subtract?
But you're still getting a 1% discount.
Oh, so you have to take 1% off the 5,000.
And there's the question. How do we go about doing it? But it's not 1% less, right? Because remember, we're getting a discount on this payment. Therefore, we're getting more, right? We're getting a 1% discount on the charge, but now it's the payment. So how does a 1% discount work on a payment? And the way it works, folks, is that for every 99 cents you pay, you subtract $1 from the bill. Okay? So what I need you to do is to tell me how many piles of 99 cents can I divide $5,000 into? Because that's what I need to know. Because that's what a 1% discount on a payment means. Okay? And this is what's weird, is that this is something this is not something we think happens very often in the business world, but this is what it means. A 1% discount on a payment means that for each 99 cents, subtract $1 from the bill. And so you guys just have to tell me, how do I divide $5,000 into 99-cent piles? How do you divide 5,000 into 99-cent piles?
So you divide 5,000 by 99 cents, and you get 5,050. With the repeating 150.
5,000 divided by 0.99. 5,050. And then what happens afterwards?
The 50 cents is repeating.
You get 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, right?
Yeah.
So now round that to the appropriate place that money should be rounded.
5, 50,
50.51. So our $5,000 payment is worth $5,050 and a tack on of 51 cents. And note that that's more than 1% of 5,000, right? And that's why you technically should do it this way, because it will actually be worth more. Because a 1% discount on a payment does not mean the same as a 1% discount on a charge. Okay? It sounds like it's a little bit weird, but this is the way to properly do it mathematically. Alright?
Because this is what
Yep. This is what the payment is worth. Now, where do I go to subtract this from, though?
the 20,000 for the 16.
Which 16?
The 16,378.56.
That's if I paid the entire thing and got my 1% discount. I didn't have that.
Oh, that one.
You got to use the original due amount, right? You got to go back to the net price to determine how much, where to subtract it from, or what it's going to, how much you owe after you're done. Okay. So be a little bit careful with that one. When you go to calculate what it would be if you had all of the money, this is how much you owe. But remember, we didn't have that much, right? That was the whole problem. We didn't have this much. We only had 5,000 because our accounts payable person is a moron, right? They didn't fill our account up, and so we can't do our job. And sometimes you actually can point the finger at someone else. It's sort of nuts, right? The nice thing about computers too is that all of that's tracked. So when they finally do put the money in, you can actually point and say, look, it was 2 days after they should have. Not my problem, right? So anyways, so you're going to take the 16,544, that was the number, right?
Yes.
Okay. And subtract the 5,050 and 51 cents, and this is how much you will owe after you make that $5,000 payment, right? So what did that work out to be? 11,000.
493.49
cents.
So you're saying that's in the case that we don't pay the regular time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, this is how much we would owe if we paid it like in, December 20th or something, like after the due date, after our 1% discount is done. Remember that technically our discount runs until December 7th. So even though we made this payment and used a 1% discount, the discount window is not closed after you made the payment. Okay? If you make another $5,000 payment, say a week later, right? So if we made another payment on November 27th, would we get a 1% discount on that payment?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's still within the window. What would we do with that $5,000 payment?
Same thing we did last time.
Yeah, exactly. The same thing we just did. We would divide by 0.99, figure out that it's worth this much, and then subtract that from where we were at, right? And so in theory, you could keep doing this as many times as you want, as long as the discount window is still open, okay? Now, let's imagine, though, instead, on, let's say on 12/1, we pay this amount off in full. How much do we pay?
Oh, no, we just do the straight times 0.99. That's just a regular 1%.
Exactly, right? So, now we need to take 1% off of the charge. Because we're paying it in full, now you go back to normal, okay? So it's only when you make those partial payments where you're not paying the bill in full do you do this weird divide by the complement concept, okay? So if on the first we still have our 1% window open, so we'll just do 11,493.49, and multiply by a regular 1% discount, 0.99. Theoretically, how much will we write that or send that transfer over as? Whatever it works out to be.
$11,378.55 repeated.
5.5 repeating.
Well, 5.5.
So 5.6. Again, round the numbers properly. If it's a 5 after the last, the penny's 5, round that penny up to 6. And the cool thing is, note, what happens, folks, if you add $5,000 to this number?
You're going to get the net price.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
the net price when you got a full 1% discount, right? Which should make sense, right? Because if you make all of your payments within the 1% discount window, you should pay whatever the 1% discount is of the full amount. And it will continue to work that way, okay? All right, so anyways, the key to that particular problem, folks, right? When you have a payment that is partial, or it does not cover the full amount, divide by your discount complement to determine how much payment is worth. Okay? So that's sort of your long-winded explanation of kind of what I just went through. Okay? With partial payments, divide by complement. With full payments, multiply by complement. Okay? And again, that's sort of a nice, sort of quick phrase that you can write down on a note card just to remind yourself, right? Partial payment, divide by complement. Full payment, multiply by complement. That's a C, I swear. Alright? And there's definitely a couple of homework problems, and I almost always have a problem on the test where I make a partial payment. Okay? And the book likes to call this the U.S. rule for some reason or another. Like this only happens in the U.S.
Maybe it did, because Walmart's a
It's not. It's the way it's done everywhere, but sometimes for some reason the book calls it the U.S. rule. I'm not sure exactly why, but anyways. Partial payments, divide by that complement to determine what it's worth. All right? So that, folks, is Chapter 7. Okay? So if you would, homework. I think it goes up to 40 in Chapter 7. Yeah. Whatever the pages are. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head.
It's, goes all the way to 48.
Does it go to 48? Is that the extra credit one?
That's the challenge problem.
Oh, so just 46?
Yeah.
Okay, so do 46, the evens. What are the pages, if you got it right there?
It doesn't say the pages on here.
Ah, it's not at the bottom.
No.
No.
Okay. I didn't do a good copy of it, sorry.
It's like 200. Yeah. 199 to 204.
Okay.
I think. Close to that.
Okay. And again, like always, challenge problem. If you show me all your work, you can potentially earn extra credit for that one. Some people actually get it. It's not always common, but sometimes the problem isn't that hard. So it's nice. Maybe always take a crack at it just for fun. All right. So, any questions about what we did with chapter 7? Again, sort of part of what you guys have to do a little bit is get used to the terminology, right? The whole concept of list price and net price and trade discount amount, right? Don't forget what each of those terms mean, because I can use any one of those terms on the test, right? I can say during any problem, calculate what the net price is and the trade discount amount, and that's it, right? And don't forget that you also need to remember the two rates, right? You need to remember the net price equivalent rate and the single equivalent discount rate. And again, I can ask for either of those or both of them, okay? So you need to know how to deal with both of them, right? So know how to calculate one and then how to calculate the other, and remember the names of the two of them, so if I ask for either of them, you can give me the correct one, okay? That's sort of... On the test, I'm only going to ask for one of them, okay? I'm not going to ask for both. So you're not going to be able to write them both down and say, sweet, I'm good. You'll have to remember which one is which, okay? So please keep in mind which one is which, right? And remember that this is net price equivalent rate is just the product of the complements. And in order to get the single equivalent discount rate, you actually use that number down here. Okay? So whatever you get up here, you do 1 minus it to get the single equivalent discount rate. All right? All right. So,
When's chapter 7 due? Wednesday or Monday?
well, Wednesday we'll go over it,
Okay.
but it's not officially due until Monday of next week. Okay? So, yeah, you always get a full week when we finish the chapter to do the homework. But remember that I'll always ask for questions the next day. So on Wednesday at the start of class, I'll say, hey, those of you who have started working on chapter 7, which ones of them do you want to see? And if you go through, we can kind of figure out which ones are sort of a pain in the ass, then you can ask me and I'll do them. On Monday, then, next week, you just gotta turn it in. Alright? Alright. So, I want to at least get started on chapter 8 so we can get ourselves caught up. We're almost caught up, folks. I mean, we're just about there. I would like to think that we are going to have ourselves caught up by the end of next week. Okay? So we should actually, probably finish chapter 8, I would guess, hopefully Monday of next week, maybe Wednesday if we have to. But the nice part about it then is that, note, next week we have a regular full week, that first week in March. Then the next week is technically spring break week, right? And theoretically, you're supposed to take your test on that Monday of spring break. And I will make the test available to you before that, like i.e. Thursday or Friday of the week before. If you would like to take the test before Monday, get it out of the way so that you can take a full week for spring break, that is perfectly okay. If not, then you're more than welcome to show up on Monday and take the test, normally. Okay? I have to be here on Monday anyway, so even if all of you take the test early, it doesn't matter. They're actually going to start on Monday during that spring break week. They're going to walk around to all the classrooms and make sure that all the teachers are sitting there the entire time. No, they literally are, right? So even if none of you show up on Monday of spring break week, I have to be sitting at that chair for an hour and a half.
You have to be available.
And I'm like, but you guys can't call this room. You can call my office, but you can't call here. So I'm like, well, that defeats the... Anyway, whatever. I try not to use logic on the administration. It doesn't always work. Whatever. I'm paid to be in this room for an hour and a half on Monday, therefore I need to be in this room, twiddling my thumbs. Essentially what I'll do is just bring all you guys' tests in and grade them on Monday. That's my plan. And what that means, of course, is that you will not get your grade for that test until at least after Monday, right? That's just so that you know. All right? All right, so anyways. Chapter 8. Markups and markdowns. And some other stuff. Well, they kind of relate to markups and markdowns, but they're anyway, whatever. You get there. We'll get there when we get there. But there are some other stuff on the side that kind of relate back to markups and markdowns, but it's a little iffy in my opinion. But I'll make it work. But you'll realize we're going to do some slightly other stuff. Okay, so. So when you're dealing with markups and markdowns, you're dealing with stuff that we are a little bit more traditionally used to dealing with when it comes to selling stuff. Okay? This is the process of running a resale shop as opposed to a retail shop. Okay? So a retail industry, which is what we did in Chapter 7, everything is driven off of the trade discount amount. Okay? In a resale shop, it's all of us. It's all the business owner's way of doing it. We buy something from someone, we mark it up a certain amount of money, and then that's what we sell it for. Traditional kind of standard business model practice, right? So, with any new chapter, you always kind of have to go through the terminology to start with. And note again that some of this terminology will be a little bit, I would like to think obvious, but just in case, we'll go over it, okay? So, again, remember, we are running a resale business. Guess what the selling price is when you're running a resale business?
What you're selling it for.
Hey, wow, good job. Price you are selling your goods at. Okay, so like I said, some of them I hope would be obvious. Okay.
What it costs you to sell that item or buy that item.
Yeah, yes, exactly, right? What you paid to get the item. That you are selling. Again, the idea, of course, is that you are also going to sell whatever it is that you buy. That's the idea. And then last but not least, what's the markup? Well, I guess I should be more specific here. Let me call it the markup amount. How much you increase onto the cost to get the selling price. And again, I would like to think that I didn't really need to define all three of those terms because they were kind of obvious to some degree. Now, abbreviations, just so that you guys can get used to them. Please note that we abbreviate selling price by using the letter S. Please note that you cannot use the letter P. The letter P stands for something else that we are going to be using a lot of in chapters 10, 12, 13, and 14, and 15. And so, in order to not confuse the P that we use here with the P that we use then, is that we will use S instead of P. Okay, so think of S as the selling price, and you should be good. Guess what we abbreviate cost with?
C.
Hey, what do you know? And guess what we abbreviate markup with? Just that, right? And so what's the basic math behind this arrangement between SC and M?
Selling price equals markup times cost, or plus cost.
There you go, plus, right? Straight up, standard sort of thinking of how you run your standard business, okay? You're going to sell Persian rugs, and so you take a flight to Persia and you buy a whole ton of rugs for $10 each. You come back home and you sell each one of them for $1,000 because that's what you can get, right? And so you $10 cost, $990 markup, $1,000 price. Welcome to Business 101, right? And as long as you can sell 10% of them, you're still making money, right? It's the sort of thing that you try and do. And the way I tend to look at this is I tend to look at it as the garage sale type of example, because when you have, when we have our neighborhood garage sale, in my neighborhood there's usually dozens of people that start up a garage sale, right? And so they're usually within walking distance. So if you get up early on a Friday morning, I normally don't have to come down here on Fridays, so I'll wander the neighborhood and look for any item that's being sold for way more than it should be. And so if you show up somewhere and you see that they're selling, maybe they're selling this stapler for $1. And I look at that stapler and I go, I know that if I buy it for $1 and sell it at my garage sale, I can sell it for $3 and someone will buy it. Why wouldn't I? Right? I mean, and so you just do it. You walk through all the different neighborhood garage sales, buy up everything that you know is being sold for too little, go back to your own garage sale, mark it up, each thing up by at least $1 and rake in the profits.
Must not have a lot of friendly neighbors.
That
Seems kind of a little bit
I have a
immoral.
friend who does the eBay thing with runner sale items. He does
Yeah.
very well.
And if you can find what sells, right? Some person's junk is some other person's treasure, right? So if you can get it for 20 cents and you can sell it online for $5.
I can just hear him saying, "Oh man, Marshall's here. Mark it up a couple."
I honestly haven't really done that, but the thought has crossed my mind more than once as I'm walking through my neighbor's stuff going, I know that's a good movie. You're selling it for $1? I guarantee you I can sell it for $5. But yeah, whatever. Okay. I'm a jerk, but I'm not that much. Right? You got to live next to your neighbors, and all of my neighbors are like lawyers, and so
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
All
it's,
right.
you gotta be nervous about those people. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being a lawyer, but enough said. Anyways, okay. Now, what's missing in this equation, folks, that we have been working with for the past 4 to 6 weeks? Percentages, right? Because everything that we're doing for the rest of this class is all percentages. Are there any percentages in there yet?
No.
So guess what I'm going to do to define the markup?
Mark is the creative percentage.
Of course, because the markup is going to be a dollar amount, but I want the markup to be a percentage. Now here is where this part of it starts to get funky, okay? Because the markup is not always driven the same way, okay? There are 2 different flavors of markup. Just like there are 3 flavors of terms, you can have 2 flavors of marking things up, okay? And I generally like to create a table and sort of a divide between the world, right? Because what happens when you're dealing with these 2 different flavors or worlds is that once you pick a side of the world, can't go over, right? You've got got to stay with this method the rest of your life, okay? Or the rest of your business life, however you want to call that, all right? So this is the traditional way that we deal with markups. We tend to think of our markups as a markup on cost, where we say, okay, we bought this for $1, and if I'm going to sell it for $2, that's going to be a markup of 100%, right? Because I marked it up $1. What's $1 compared to $1? It's 100%. They're the same. Therefore, my markup was 100%. Okay? The other way to deal with the markup is to base the markup on price. Now, let's work on that same example. If I bought something for $1 and I'm selling it for $2,
That's not an increase by percent, it's an increase by $1.
it's an increase by $1. But what is the percentage markup as a percent of cost is 100%. But, folks, what am I selling that item for?
2 times the amount.
2, right? How much did I mark it up? 1. 1 is what percent of 2? 50. So in that case where I bought it for $1, sold it for $2, I either marked up 100% on cost, or I marked up 50% on price. Those are the 2 different ways that you can calculate your markup. You can either calculate your markup as a percentage of what you paid for it, or as a percentage of what you're going to sell it for. Okay? Now, when you're talking to your clients who are buying things from you, which sounds better? I marked it up 100%, or I marked it up 50%?
50%.
Guess why businesses sometimes like to use this technique of marking up prices?
Because it still costs the same.
It's still the same, right? It's just that because they've based the markup on something else, the percent actually changes. And in general, folks, this percentage will always be less than that. Almost always. There's a few instances where it isn't, but it's very rare that you're going to run into it. Okay? And so the idea is that as a business, you can now start saying that when you buy something for $1 and sell it for $2, instead of saying you had to mark it up by 100%, you can say I only marked it up by 50%. And then on the small print say, based on price. Do you think businesses would do something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, yes. Duh, right? That's the idea. Okay? Now, the key, of course, is that you have to know the difference. All right? And the difference is relatively straightforward. All right? The basic math, though, stays the same. All right? Go down. Okay. So this is true in both worlds, right? No matter what, that's always true. Okay, the selling price is always cost plus the markup. So that basic math equation can't change. The difference here is that when your markup is on cost, your markup is defined as the rate times the cost. And the rate is your percentage markup. Okay? But again, this is the percentage markup on cost. Okay? The only way that this problem changes, right? This is when you mark up on cost. Guess what I'm going to do over here when it's markup on price? How am I going to define my markup? Yeah, rate times price. In this case, S, right? Otherwise, everything else is exactly the same, right? It's just a matter of how you want to define what your percentage is based on. Okay? Now, there are more realistic reasons other than just trying to be sneaky to using these, okay? Generally, most businesses will mark up things on cost if, when they sell it at the price that they marked it up for, and that's it. So if you're never going to change the price of an item, you're almost always going to use markup on cost. Okay? So if you bought it for You know, this is generally the way drug industry works, right? So if the pharmacy buys the drugs for $5 a pill, they're going to sell them for $8.50 per pill. And that's the markup amount, it's a markup rate, and it's going to be that price always.
Because they don't go on sale.
Yeah, exactly. There's no sales going on a drug, right? They're always going to be $8.50 no matter what. Unless the cost that they have to pay starts going up, right? Now, if you have an item that's constantly changing in price, right? So imagine, if you will, like art, right? So an artist comes to you and says, I've got all these paintings that I want you to try and sell for me. And you as an art dealer will say, okay, well, I'm going to buy all of these paintings from you for a certain amount of money. And then you start marking up the price, obviously, right? Because you need to make money in the deal. You will generally use markup on price, because once you set a price for a painting, is there a guarantee you're going to sell it? No. And so what are you going to have to do to change the price? You're going to have to mark it up or down again, right? Well, if you mark down the price again, do you always want to have to go back to the cost to figure out what to mark it down by? No, you want to say, well, the price was $850. You're going to mark it down 10% on that price, right? So now all of your markups, or in this case markdowns, will always go back to the price as you move the price up and down, right? And that's when you want to use this kind of a technique in your business. So if your business has a constantly shifting price structure, you will mark up on price. And it will make the beginning of your business look weird, but when prices start fluctuating regularly, it'll be very easy for you to change while you're going. Because you can just say, well, the price was $850. This artist, it turns out, is really, really much better than we thought. I'm going to mark everything up of theirs 20%. You're going to mark it up on the current price of 20%, not going back to the cost and figuring out, well, what's 20% of the cost when I bought it, and adding that to every that would sell, right? And so this is why it's done that way, okay? In the real world, different businesses will use different schemes, and once they pick a side of the world to work on, you don't go back and forth, right? So if you mark up on cost and you're going to change the price, if you're going to mark it up or down, you have to go back to the original cost to tell it what's the markup or markdown as a percentage, always. Okay, that's the way businesses are stuck working. All right, and this is why generally businesses have to make a concerned decision at the very beginning of their existence, which of these they're going to use. All right. All right. So I think I'm going to stop right there. But what I want to do is to give you a flavor of what I'm going to do next. Okay? We're not going to do this. We're going to come back and start here tomorrow, right here. But what I'm going to do is give you just a hint. I want to do a little substitution trick. I'm going to do a little bit of algebra. Okay? It's going to be fun algebra, because it's not stuff that you have to repeat, but you just get to use it. Okay? But the idea is that what does this look like from chapter 6?
Oh, the percent increase.
Percent increase, right? This is new equals old plus rate times old. Very traditional method for dealing with markups. Over here, this is why this one tends to be a little bit scary, because this is not a percent markup scheme. Right? It's not a percent increase, even though what we're talking about is a markup. Okay? And the idea is that we are going to manipulate these two algebraic equations to come up with some formulas that will simplify our lives when we are dealing with these types of problems. Okay? So, I don't want to get to it today. I just want to sort of preface you that our plan for Wednesday, because today's Monday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Poor guy.
Sometimes I'm not sure. We will come back and start here and play around with these equations to come up with some things to make life easier, hopefully, and then move forward with problems that come from marking up on cost or marking up. Okay? So for next time, please work on the chapter 7 homework, and then we will. There's no way we'll finish all of chapter 8 on Wednesday, but we'll get close. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody.